Is Radiohead dead? It's an important question because it's an important band. You don't have to be some huge Radiohead fan to acknowledge that. I'm not some diehard Radiohead fan. I love their earlier stuff. I was totally flabbergasted by Kid A, and I've really struggled to return to the fold since. I'm not above admitting that. Go ahead and at me and tell me, I don't have a sophisticated enough an ear or whatever it is. I was listening to In Rainbows just yesterday. It's tough for me, man. I don't hear a lot on there that grabs me the way OK Computer or the Bends or even their debut album, which I'll sing the praises of till my last breath. It's some people, poo-poo Creep and that debut. I love that record. I love Creep. I love the Bends. I love OK Computer. Adore that stuff. I've heard some stuff on Hail to the Thief and In Rainbows and that stuff. That's okay. It just doesn't resonate with me the way the earlier stuff does. And you can go ahead and savage me for that. That's fine. But the point is, this is an important band. Nothing will ever, I don't care what they do from here on out. Nothing will ever change my opinion about that. I mean, it's really not even it's not a subjective observation. I mean, this is a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band. They were inducted in 2019 that sold 30 million records. I love the way the UK outlet The Independent described them as Thom, Yorke, and Jonny Greenwood as the Lennon and McCartney of indie miserableism. Only the Brits can come up with language like that to describe this tour de force. That is Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood, who now are releasing their second record as The Smile on January 26th, I believe. Second record comes out. And what's so cool about this from the perspective of a Radiohead fan, and listen, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Radiohead, but the true Radiohead fan, to me, is a listener who is enthusiastic about the opportunity that the many side projects that Radiohead has splintered off into over the years, especially in recent years, just the opportunity that gives Radiohead fans to hear all these different dimensions of what Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood in particular can come up with. And there are plenty of other side projects. We'll talk about the other guys like Ed O'Brien and those guys getting into other stuff. That's just so cool. It's an opportunity that you don't really get as a fan of, say, U2. I talk about this distinction between U2 and Radiohead on my video about U2. Go ahead and take a look at that. I don't want to rehash all that here, but I just want to say, for me, the big distinction between a band like U2 and a band like Radiohead is U2 has spent the better part of the last several decades haunted by the shadow of their former glory. Radiohead never spent a minute in the shadow of the glories established by OK Computer and the Bends. And listen, those shadows loomed large, okay? That was important, incredible, groundbreaking stuff on those records. I mean, those were monumental statements in a decade full of them. The 90s? Are you kidding me? And then what do they do with Kid A? I mean, it's a total about face with the more electronic tinged, stuff they were doing on Kid A and just following their own creative path thereafter. Are we alienating our fans? So, and you know why? Because these are artists who understand, and we'll talk about this later on, that their only obligation is to the muse. Their only obligation is to their art, not so much to their fans. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, maybe to some people, but that's just the damn truth. I mean, they're artists first, before anything else. Their obligation is not to their fans. Their obligation is to their art. And there are few bands in my lifetime who have been as unflinchingly devoted to that kind of an authentic creative path like these guys. And so that's why I have immense respect for Radiohead. I mean, and the comparison to U2 will come up again. It's not just me making this comparison. This story by The Independent about whether Radiohead is dead, a question precipitated most recently by the forthcoming release of the second album by The Smile, the side project involving Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood. That story also to my surprise, I had done this video about U2, and this connection occurred to me, this distinction rather, between Radiohead and U2, and then later on I see this story by The Independent, and I see it's occurring to other people too, to whatever reason. I mean, these aesthetically, these bands have to my ear, very little in common. Okay, U2 and Radiohead. But people are waking up to this important distinction between a band that lives in the shadow of its former glories, you know, Joshua Tree and all that stuff, and Achtung Baby, and I mean, anything that U2 did in the 80s, the earlier stuff was just great. Unforgettable Fire, all that stuff. But ever since, I mean, when they came out with what was supposed to be their resurgence, I forget, with Walk On, and all that stuff, that I think Daniel Lanois returned to the fold, right? Did Brian Eno as well for that record they put out was it 2000? Ever since, they've just been trying to sound like they used to sound. There's nothing new for them to say, and yet they keep saying it. It's tiresome. And Radiohead never for a minute fell into that trap, okay? That's why I say they're important, and you don't have to be some big fan of theirs to just acknowledge that, you know? But this side project, The Smile, I mean, it's not the only side project that has, not by a long shot, emerged from Radiohead. I mean, you know, Thom Yorke was part of that Atoms for Peace supergroup with Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Nigel Godrich was a part of it. The great drummer Joey Waronker, who, as I've said in other videos, is just everywhere. I mean, he played on the new Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon redo that came out this year. He's played with Beck. He's played with R.E.M. You know, he's played with Smashing Pumpkins. Everyone. So that was cool. Thom Yorke's had 3 solo albums out. He's got Eraser in 2006, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes 2017, Anima in 2019. In the meantime, he does a soundtrack for the remake of the horror film Suspiria in 2018. But The Smile, with Wall of Eyes, their next project, Jonny Greenwood and Thom Yorke and friends, coming out on January 26th. And it gets me thinking in part about other great side projects. You know, there's so many of them. I definitely the topic for an entire separate video. But what are the side projects that come to mind just for me that really made an impact on me that I found to be, you know, charming or memorable or monumentally important in some cases? I mean, Nick Cave with Grinder Man, they put out a couple records. That was an awesome project. I remember talking to someone at a record store about how I was sort of ambivalent about Grinder Man, and then she said to me, "Listen, Nick Cave with a Stratocaster? Are you kidding me?" And I was like, "You know what? You're right." That is pretty cool. You know, James Mercer from the Shins starting Broken Bells. I mean, Broken Bells is an amazing side project. Their eponymous debut 2010 was great, and then they followed up with, to my ear, something that had, at least in part, some even better stuff on it with After the Disco in 2014. Into the Blue last year was okay. I found some stuff to enjoy there, but man, those first 2 records by Broken Bells, hell of a side project with Danger Mouse, you know, teaming up with James Mercer. And we'll talk about, you know, why these side projects happen. James Mercer has spoken a lot about why he broke off from the Shins, just, you know, not breaking up the band, but just he needed another outlet, you know. And we'll talk about that. I mean, Damon Albarn from Blur, you know, doing Gorillaz. I mean, Gorillaz with their 8 albums between 2001 and this year with Cracker Island, right? A pretty good Gorillaz record. Maybe not their finest hour, but certainly not a terrible outing. And exciting that Damon's still this, you know, creatively active. That's awesome. Jack White with the Raconteurs, right? Steady As She Goes in 2006 being this monster hit for them. That was cool. Chris Cornell and Tom Morello, right, getting together with Audio Slave, put out a few albums, 2002, 2005, 2006. We got a few records out of that. Velvet Revolver, Slash, and Scott Weiland, right? Put out a couple records in 04 and 07. And then probably the greatest, you know, so-called side project of all time was really more of in the supergroup category, would be the Traveling Wilburys. I mean, you know, you got Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne from ELO, George Harrison from the Beatles, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, all teaming up and making this freaking brilliant record in 1988. You know, and think about, this is why the side projects happen, okay? How liberating was it? Just take the Wilburys for a second. How liberating was it for Bob Dylan to not have to be Bob Dylan for a whole record? I mean, how cool was that? To not be burdened to the point of creative paralysis by the legend that is, you know, Bob Dylan, having to be Bob Dylan again and again and again. He could just goof around with some pals and do songs with titles like Tweeter and the Monkeyman, which, by the way, was one of the most disciplined recordings of the man's entire life. I mean, in the other songs he wrote for that, he does a lot of lead vocal on that Traveling Wilburys album. You could hear him like exhaling throughout that record. I don't have to be Bob Dylan for a minute. I could just have some fun with some pals. Put it on tape, and it turned out great. Listen to Tweeter and the Monkeyman if you've never heard it. It's one of the greatest Bob Dylan songs ever. And it's not from a Bob Dylan record. It's from this goofy-ass album called Traveling Wilburys, with this band Traveling Wilburys, right? And the lyrics are ridiculous but hilarious. The music is freaking brilliant. And that happens because he didn't have to be who he always, he didn't have to assign himself to all those expectations that come with being Bob Dylan. I mean, it doesn't make him any different from any other great artist who has indulged side projects. I liked what Stephen Hayden, who wrote a book about Radiohead, said about the side projects like The Smile. He said, with regard to The Smile, something about working under the Smile moniker means that Yorke and Greenwood both feel liberated to sound like their older selves. Yeah, and it's okay. Like, they can be themselves in a way that perhaps they don't feel liberated to do, making another Radiohead record. Radiohead with all of this just crushing expectation. I mean, that's got to be, when you're as successful as they were with OK Computer and the Bends, it's great. You achieve success. But man, watch my Andre 3000 video. I talk a lot about what Andre 3000 says about why he does a wind instrument album in New Blue Sun, and why he doesn't feel like as outcast or even as a rapper he necessarily has anything to say here in 2023 that engages him. This happens. Like, it's okay. And what is Andre 3000's way of liberating himself creatively? To create this, what is being widely described, perhaps not entirely correctly, as a flute album. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. Good for him. I mean, having to be outcast every time you hit a studio, how burdensome is that? This is the magic of the side project. This unburdens great artists of the impossible expectations established by their former glory, something that U2 just never could find it within themselves, to work out. And here's what James Mercer said of the Shins about starting Broken Bells. He said, I wanted to try something totally different. It has started to feel heavy in the Shins. I didn't know what I wanted to do, maybe a solo thing or a new band. Instead, he teams up with Danger Mouse and cuts some brilliant, important, impactful music as Broken Bells. Those albums are beautiful, wonderful, solid songwriting as you'll always get from James Mercer. But the production that Danger Mouse brings to it, it's such a killer combo, those two. Here's another thought that this story in The Independent, which I'll link to in the description, says about side projects as they pertain to Radiohead. One source says, I've always felt that Radiohead side projects are necessary for the musical and personal growth of the band members. Right. Sometimes stepping into a studio as Radiohead might come with the risk of feeling as if you're stepping into a prison, creatively. Sometimes in order to breathe and grow, you got to branch away from that and stretch your legs in a different way. This independent piece goes on to say, but with their latest solo undertaking, something has changed. Yorke and Greenwood have The Smile. Ed O'Brien and Phil Selway have gone solo. Colin Greenwood, Johnny's older brother, is touring with Nick Cave. One difference now is that all 5 band members seem to be pursuing other projects. This is all great when it loops back to Radiohead. The concerning element for fans lately seems to be that this latter part of the equation doesn't seem to be on the minds of the band anymore. That latter part of the equation being looping back to Radiohead. And that matters, because Radiohead was such a force when they first broke out with their first 3 records. I remember growing up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I spent most of my teens in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. 86th Street, there was a nice little record shop I would frequent all the time. And I remember this one guy, I never forgot this. Something from the Bends came on in the shop one day as I was in there flipping through CDs. Remember those? And this dude who worked there, he was always there. He had this like shaggy, unkempt hair and came to work smelling like his dogs, easily identifiable as a guy who listened to only like, Yes and Rush records. Nothing against Yes and Rush. I adore, love, respect both bands, but he was the kind of guy that would listen to that stuff with blinders on. Nothing else mattered. It was, very one-track mind aesthetically in terms of his musical taste. Like he would always be like poorly dressed in a shirt with like burp stains on it, wearing jeans his mom probably bought him in high school. You would look at this guy and you would think, there's no way this man washes his hands after using a public urinal. It's just not possible. And one day this guy said, as something from the bands, I don't know, High and Dry was playing or something. And I remember he got this look of anger and confusion on his face one day in the shop, and he just said out loud, "What is it with these guys? What's the big deal? I don't get it." And that's when I knew, and this is probably why I never forgot it, as it pertains to Radiohead. That's when I knew that Radiohead were doing something important. Because it wasn't just the guy that the guy was confused, he was pissed. And that's what showed me that Radiohead was doing something that gets under the skin of some folks. And when you're making music that gets under your skin, you're doing something that is abrasive, but also impactful, consequential, important, different, in a way that in some instances annoys people, I mean, there are artists who appreciate negative feedback as much as positive, because either way they're doing something of impact, right? I mean, listen to Trans in 1982, the sort of electronic synth-driven record that Neil Young put out. I mean, that took some courage, man. He didn't care. Do you think his fans glommed onto that? No. Did it matter to him? No. Did it matter to Radiohead that all the fans that they gathered with Karma Police and Exit Music and Electioneering abandoned them when Kid A came out? No. Because their obligation was to their art, as it is to this day. And that's so admirable. There's such authenticity and courage to that creatively. You've got, I mean, I don't want to tell you what you have to respect. I'm just saying that I find it to be eminently respectable. What they're doing, So, Radiohead fans are sort of bristling at the idea that there's a new album by The Smile coming out, rather than a new album by Radiohead. Radiohead hasn't put a record out since 2016. And now here's Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood coming out with a new album by The Smile called Wall of Eyes on January 26th. And here's what some of the fans are saying. Radiohead are over. Not going to listen to this diet version. That's kind of brutal, but there's something to be said for that. I mean, I only say this because I've listened to the title track Wall of Eyes over and over again in preparation for this video. I'll link to it in the description. It's on YouTube, and it's pleasant. It's okay. It's got this almost bossa nova driven acoustic riff running through the entire song, which other than that doesn't really go anywhere else, with the exception of some sort of predictably haunting string arrangements. Jonny Greenwood's done a lot of really celebrated film music. So, you get that element in there. There's some weird, like, random, I don't know, sounds that start sort of percolating in the last minute of the song or so. And it sounds like almost, with the exception of the more haunting element, something you might hear on a Bell and Sebastian record, something straight out of like, the Velvet Underground playbook. It's fine. But when you compare an acoustic, I don't know, do I call it a ballad like this, to Exit Music from OK Computer, I get that this makes me sound narrow-minded or whatever. I'm sorry, Exit Music kicks it in the ass. It's not even a contest. So if you're going to give me, acoustic ballads with haunting string arrangements laid over it, I'll take Exit Music. I'm sorry, and I'm not one to like compare, a band's former glories, like I'm saying, to what they're doing now. I'm just saying, when I hear it, I ask myself, why do I want to hear this again? Especially as someone who is informed of what the greatness that preceded it. And with Wall of Eyes, I'm not going to listen to it a lot. I'm just not. And maybe it's just the title track. Maybe there's other stuff on this record. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that these guys are following their creative vision wherever it leads them. And I celebrate them for that. Doesn't matter if I like what they're coming up with. What matters is what they're doing, the authenticity that they're adhering to at all costs. It's, again, I can't say it enough. It's awesome. You know, that they have this integrity creatively. Another fan said, I used to think Ed and Colin and Phil got thrown out of the group, but I think they might have just left because they didn't want to participate in Thom and Jonny's nonsense. It's not nonsense. I'm not saying it's nonsense, nor, come on. It's art, and they're enjoying creative freedom and free creative expression in any way that it comes. And they're not handcuffing themselves to the legacy of this one band that they created in the mid-1980s. It's been a while, you know? I mean, that's where Radiohead's origins date back to, you know? So Ed Power of The Independent, he asks some questions about this. He says, are Radiohead truly done and dusted? Does the continuation of The Smile spell the end of arguably the most successful art rock band of all time? Have Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood left their audience high and dry? Oh, the puns, Ed. Whoo! Didn't see that one coming, did you? As ever, with the most enigmatic collective to ever fill a stadium, yikes, that's really saying something. Are they? Maybe. There have been some enigmatic collectives over the decades, though, sir. The answer is cloaked in ambiguity. I mean, is it? Is it ambiguous when you listen to that 2016 album Moon-Shaped Pool that they put out? If you're a Radiohead fan going way back, you're listening to songs like True Love Waits, and you're like, wait a minute. Haven't they been playing this song since, like, before OK Computer came out? Yes. I mean, the Bends came out in 1995, and that was the year that they first started, as far as I can tell, playing True Love Waits live, and it appears on a record almost, 20 years later? Burn the Witch was on that record too, originated with the Kid A sessions for that 2000 album, which, for my money, was one of the boldest, most courageous, most authentic statements made by a band in my lifetime. For them to have turned coat on the sounds of preceding albums, the creative vision that they mapped on those preceding records, and come out with Kid A was just so audacious. You know? They've invested more energy, really, as Radiohead, in looking back than looking forward as a unit, a 5-piece unit called Radiohead. You know, they put out these reissues, the anniversary reissue of OK Computer in 2017, because that record came out in 1997. I was a junior in high school. Got a 5-star review from Rolling Stone, which said of the package that its 3 unreleased tracks from the OK Computer sessions, quote, complete the picture of one of rock's greatest bands cresting their first creative peak. I think that's accurate. Pretty spot on. And if you've seen my other videos, you know that Rolling Stone's taking a bit of a beating on this channel, but I commend them for that. That's pretty close to the truth. Kid A and Amnesiac, I believe they put out this dual reissue in 2021. Got a 5-star review from The Guardian, which also drew attention to the jewels of any reissue, right, which are the unreleased tracks that it contains. And they said the package as a whole, between these 2 reissues, comprised a fascinating companion piece for 2 classic albums. Okay? But what these reissues generate is more looking back than looking forward. Okay? It's a reflection on what was, not what might be possible going forward for this admittedly mighty band that we know to be Radiohead. You know when they are looking forward? With The Smile. And Radiohead fans might not like the sound of that, but as artists, that's what jazzes these guys up. Jonny Greenwood said, we're still firing off each other and it feels productive. So while that's happening, we just want to keep moving forward, I think. You know what maybe doesn't make Jonny Greenwood feel like he's moving forward? Radiohead. Sorry, Radiohead fans. That's what I hear. It's not as engaging or interesting to them right now. Does that mean it never will be again? Absolutely not. You know, sometimes you just need a break from who you were or what you were in order to find yourself again or discover a new path, and the next chapter in your life. I mean, you know, Ed O'Brien said, the thing with Radiohead, we could do something in a couple years. We might not. At the moment, because we've done it for so long, we're all reaching out and having different experiences. And that's okay because, as I said, the band's sole obligation is not to its fans. Sorry. It's to its art, to the art itself. They're artists. They serve the muse, not the masses. Okay? One guy, Sean Perrin, he has a Radiohead podcast, said they don't owe much to their fans. I agree with that, Sean. But I do feel it would at least be an appreciated courtesy to make a decision about the future of the band, one way or another, for better or worse. Forgive me, Sean, but I find that to be a patently ridiculous thing to say. Because these guys have no idea where the muse is going to take them. If it'll keep pulling them in their own respective directions, or if it might pull them back together. There is no decision. There may never be. You know, some bands just stop, guys. They do. This happens. Again, I talked about this on the Andre 3000 video. Some bands stop making music at the right time. And sometimes that's really important for their legacy. U2 being a band that has failed abjectly in that regard. You know, they've been making music for too long. They should have stopped a while back. There are subsequent records in this monstrosity that they're doing at the, whatever it's called, in Las Vegas. Make that pretty clear, right? So, is Radiohead dead? Well, here's what the Independent's speculation amounts to. The Independent says, some watchers regard the smile as a strong indicator that Yorke and Greenwood are quietly decoupling from Radiohead. Others believe the opposite is the case. They suggest that Radiohead's hiatus is instead down to Ed O'Brien wanting to take time away. The smile is Yorke and Greenwood's attempt at keeping the home fires flickering. That theory is supported by the few public statements the group have put out. I know Ed's making another solo record at the moment, and Colin is on tour with Nick Cave, said Greenwood earlier this year. Who knows? We'll have to wait until everyone has time and inclination. They've got the time. Inclination is an entirely separate question. Okay. Still, if it turns out that Radiohead have indeed sent their final transmission, there is a silver lining, and this is important stuff. Okay, listen closely. Think of the alternative. Of the many great alternative outfits who eventually slip into midlife dotage, look at R.E.M., who released several Duff records before coming to their scenes and calling it quits in 2011. I disagree. I loved the last R.E.M. records that were put out. But that's a subject for another day. Most depressing of all are U2. Absolutely. Who morphed into a $1 billion karaoke act, desecrating their vaunted reputation by performing from inside a giant digital snow globe on the Las Vegas Strip. I couldn't have put it better myself. Gotta love the Brits and their handle of the English language, huh? Whatever the future holds for Radiohead, fans can at least console themselves in the knowledge that they won't defile their legacy as U2 have theirs, nor are they likely to emulate Coldplay and try to get down with the kids by hooking up with pop stars such as BTS. Woo! Not a lot to disagree with there. But there might be some hope for Radiohead fans after all of this depression, right? Because the drummer, Philip Selway, said this. He told NME just last month, we've actually had a little break for a minute. The last show that we did was back in 2018, but we're coming back around to that point now. There is just something particular to that relationship, that creative relationship and personal relationship that you can't get anywhere else. Now, what I hear there is Selway talking to the band, trying to sort of tease them away from their respective solo projects, perhaps. Or is this how they really feel in their hearts? I mean, we can only speculate, we don't know. But I hear a lot of hope, maybe not so much reality in what Selway's saying here. He adds, we have gotten together, and we're talking about future plans, but in the immediate future, we've all got other projects we'd like to see through properly. There's a collective desire to make music among the five of us. We all really value that musical relationship, and that's been there for 38 years. It remains really important to us. It's just about finding that scenario when a group of musicians are all of a mind and firing on all cylinders. That's my dream scenario, see? To be in that spot, that's my aspiration. I hear a lot of wishful thinking there from Selway. You know, there was that moment when George Foreman fought Michael Moore about, was it 95, 94? And Foreman was this old, way past his prime heavyweight, and Moore was the heavyweight champion. I remember one of the famed boxing announcers, his name escapes me. He was every big boxing match. He was the play-by-play guy. And I remember he said at the start of the match that all the people that were betting on Foreman that night, there was a lot of money on Foreman, were betting with their hearts and not their minds. But guess what? George Foreman won that night, didn't he? He knocked Moore for a loop and took the title. So, is Selway speaking from the heart and not the head when he says these things that give Radiohead fans some glimmer of hope, false or real? Maybe, but you never know. Personally, it might be better if Radiohead put it to bed. Maybe Radiohead fans don't want to hear that. There's so much wonderful stuff that you can always listen to. These reissues keep coming out. They're unreleased tracks. Broaden your palette enough to enjoy this next Smile album. You know, go back and listen to Atoms for Peace, whatever it might be. Check out a Jonny Greenwood soundtrack, will you? There's plenty of music still to come from these guys. It just might not be put out under the Radiohead mantle. And that might be a permanent circumstance. But here's where gratitude is so important. How much joy has Radiohead, and subsequently perhaps to some extent some of these side projects, brought to your life? And maybe it's okay if that's it. And maybe it's okay when some bands stop making music, because perhaps that's what's best for their legacy, for their own well-being, for their own creative integrity. And Radiohead might be the latest band to have done that. For better or worse from a fan's perspective, I guess the bottom line here is stay tuned. We shall see. Let's see how that Smile album plays out in January, and perhaps we return to this topic